Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the ConTech Exec Podcast. Today, I've got a very special guest from BuildVision, Mike Powers. Welcome to our humble little show here. Thank you for being here today. What's going on in your world?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Robert. Excited to talk to you. Lots of chaos right now in the world of construction. I'm sure everyone's kind of talking about and hearing constant things about data center buildouts. But with that, there's a whole downstream effect of the challenges that hospitals are facing because of the data center buildout. So I would just overall say chaotic is the kind of the vibe right now.
Yeah, well, that may even be an understatement, considering the time it takes to get products. And of course, what's more important, right? Are hospital projects more important, or are your data centers more important? And, who's first in line, those types of things. But we can get into all that later, because that's a very, very deep subject that obviously we want to go down that path. But first, let's talk just a little bit about BuildVision and kind of how you got into it and where it comes from. What's the impetus for
Yeah.
BuildVision?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background was in commercial construction. Out of college, I worked at Turner, specifically in their strategic procurement group called Source Blue. So what Source Blue does is Source Blue pre-purchases the majority of mechanical, electrical equipment for their commercial construction projects for owners. So they'll go in before, bidding out to a subcontractor and say, hey, we're going to buy the generators, the switchgear, the chillers, the air handling units. We'll competitively bid it. We'll open book it to you as an owner. We think we can get better pricing and we'll charge for this service. And with that, they're buying about $1.5 billion now of mechanical electrical equipment a year. So they end up being one of the largest purchasers of mechanical electrical equipment in the United States. And it creates a competitive advantage for them. So I did that for 4 years, then made the jump to the construction tech side, working at Building Connected. I actually pitched the idea of helping to build a procurement software to Dustin at Building Connected back in 2016. Ran sales there for a bit. We got acquired by Autodesk. I ran enterprise sales at Autodesk for 4 years, specifically focusing on large general contractors. And the recurring theme I was getting from all these general contractors, hey, help us build out a strategic purchasing arm similar to what Source Blue has. So after about the 30th general contractor asked, started BuildVision with that goal of helping to create a procurement software that helps contractors, suppliers, and OEMs source, procure, and finance all the strategic equipment on a commercial construction project. We're pretty agnostic of who the buyer is. The buyer can be a data center builder, hyperscaler, to a local subcontractor. And on the OEM side, supplier side, we work with reps at a local market and then OEMs at a pretty large scale, kind of at their executive level.
That's a huge undertaking. Seriously, you must be crazy. You're absolutely crazy, right?
It's fun though. This is the overall thesis of it's fascinating that construction, strategic, so supply chain pieces, so things that are engineered in one location, it can be shipped across the country or world, are still managed by local commercial construction projects. So Train, for example, it right now can be part of a lien waiver or a liquidated damages clause, and the manufacturing world just can't operate that way. So we're creating this verticalized supply chain that helps really normalize onto what we call an ontology layer, all these strategic pieces of equipment. Let owner have direct insight into where their pieces of equipment are in the supply chain. Capital providers can release capital to OEMs based on milestones hit. And it just really verticalizes that entire piece to the point where hey, Toyota right now builds a factory and say we need 3 years of Toyota Camry engines. They go to an OEM and they buy and source that for 3 years. We're getting to the point in BuildVision where you can do that same thing at scale. So an owner can say, hey, we need to go buy 300 chillers in the next 12 months for these 300 data centers. Let's go strategically engage with OEMs and local reps to strategically source that and verticalize the supply chain.
Yeah, and that's always the big thing, right? It's always before you kind of had like the buyout process, right? Where you had a subcontractor in charge of, hey, I'm going to get the material because I get it from, said contractor. You got to go through three or four different, kind of parties to get the material you want. And there wasn't always a guarantee, right? So there was like, oh, did I get the right thing? Was the submittal process correct? Those types of things. And then even now, especially what you're talking about, capital projects, when we're talking about these very, very large projects, what's the lead time? On a lot of this stuff. Like you got to have it in supply. If it's not in supply, I heard recently that some transformers at scale were 8 months to 12 months out. If needing to order it, and that seemed rather daunting for me to think about all these infrastructure projects that are needing to kick off, and then suddenly we don't necessarily have the transformers or things like that to do that.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about like the first principle of why that happens, is like lead time is like a very terrible indicator of like what's going on, because it's based on like already locked in capacity in a manufacturer, as opposed to a manufacturer having the ability to capacity plan. So if you go to a train, for example, and Google comes to them and say, hey, we want to buy 2 years of manufacturing capacity. Train has to make the business decision to, hey, do we allocate an entire factory to Google as a hyperscaler to build chillers, and then kind of say, don't talk to the rest of the market in that example, or do we go out and build another factory to build chillers? And there's so much like conservatism in the OEM space that risk and capital investments very, very struggle. It's a big ask because they don't have capacity planning.
Right.
So
Well,
we think we can get to that point through BuildVision to give them direct insight.
and it's also a catch 22 at that point. You stop and think about it. Hey, by the way, we're trained. We're going to be, focusing on Google, but we need another plant to do it. So guess what we're going to need in order to build that plant? We're going to need some more stuff. Where do we get it from? We've got to wait on these items to say build a new plant to then supply other people who are going to build more new plants. That's a crazy, crazy thought. We touched on this earlier, your chaotic world of, and I want you to kind of expound more on that chaotic world a little bit of, we've got data centers needing to pop out of the ground. We got a Stargate project, popping out of the ground over here in Abilene, and just kind of tell me, your thoughts on that and kind of how that's affecting your world.
Yeah. So again, it just kind of ties back to this capacity planning for these manufacturers. A 1,000-ton scrolled chiller could be used at a data center, could be used at a hospital, could be used at an apartment complex. And those hospital systems, those apartment complexes, a stadium just don't have the leverage or capabilities to actually go to manufacturers and say, hey, let me go lock in factory slots like a hyperscaler could do. So, if you're operating a business, if you're selling components, it makes sense that to sell to the customer that's going to pay you more quickly, that's going to build out capacity with you, and it's going to have like locked in orders for extended periods of time. The construction projects just can't do that at scale right now outside of the data center world. So you're seeing like these data center teams build massive procurement arms where they're literally just like, hey, I need 100, 1,000, 2,000, 1,000-ton chillers. And it's a line item. It's not a major cost to the cost of the data center as the full, like, it's right now it's like 1 gigawatt data center is a $40 billion investment. It's not 10 billion of mechanical electrical equipment. It's probably 400 or 500 million of mechanical electrical equipment. So it's a small pieces for those world. But for a hospital system, they might be dedicating 20 to 30% of the cost of the project to mechanical electrical systems.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing there's a lot of friction in that world. And, the way the manufacturers operate with their local rep networks, it's hard for them to manage the capacity planning. A local mechanical rep in Texas might have a slot locked in for a chiller, but then it gets picked up by a data center, even in a 2-week negotiation of a signed contract.
Yeah. So would BuildVision be able to be like that kind of a source of truth for how much business is kind of out there? Like, hey, there's a request over here for this. There's a request over here for this. This is how much you guys are going to have to plan for in the coming months.
Yeah.
Is that visible to the manufacturers?
Yeah, it will be. So we're partnering with a lot of manufacturers to do that at scale. What we're really good at right now is we're really good at taking unstructured data and structuring it for customers. So that could be a set of construction drawings, submittals, specs, an email, a narrative. Is structured that in what we call equipment packages. So that could be like a chiller, a rooftop unit, a generator. And then we normalize that across the entire portfolio. So if a manufacturer, might be doing, five, 600,000 equipment selections annually, we can take all that data for them, structure it, organize it for them, make it a source of truth. So they can start seeing these things more in real time and be reactive be proactive instead of reactive around capacity planning. Because we can track changes, we can track really everything that happens. And then that like conical like atom in that world for us is that what we call equipment package. So how is that equipment package designed, procured, released, fabricated, and financed all in one place? And based on the views of those OEMs, the suppliers, the reps, the contractor, the OEM, what controls they have, they can see different aspects of that flow and know exactly where it is in the supply chain.
Yeah, 'cause that would seem like it would be beneficial for everybody on like both sides, right? You're sitting there, you've got a manufacturer who doesn't know necessarily how much they're going to need to manufacture. They don't really have a forecast. They know it's out there, but the orders come in and then it's all of a sudden a react situation rather than a kind of a proactive situation. And then on the GC side, and so the GCs and the contractors, that's your client base really there,
So we
or
have three types of clients right now. One we call like the contractor, that could be a general contractor, a subcontractor, an owner that's actually buying the equipment.
mm-hmm.
We tie that to what we call like our canonical spec, which is like, hey, this is the source of truth from an engineer of record. It says you need 1,000 tons of chill. That's kind of customer number one. Customer number two is the rep supplier network across the country. That could be a local rep, or that could be a trained sales office as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third customer that we're engaged with are OEMs,
Okay.
who are kind of like the technical source of truth. It's just because an engineer puts something on a drawing that says they need 1,000-ton chiller in space doesn't mean that it's technically able to be built by a manufacturer. So there's always like this back and forth around that. But again, it all structures down to that equipment package. So each one of those parties can engage based on where they're at.
Yeah, my experience with this kind of thing has always been at a bit smaller scale than some of these capital projects, but I totally understand. It's like sometimes you can't necessarily put a large unit in a certain space, so you maybe have to divide it into two smaller units and then kind of get the same output, right? I mean, obviously, what you're looking about is matching, the output input, specifications of the job. So I totally get that. And then, of course, you can't just, if you do order one and it's the wrong size, guess what? Yeah. Now you're in real trouble.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the chaos of that, right? And it comes down to kind of manufacturers' capacity to build what's necessary and who's in line first. How tell me how that chaos is for me. And I'm just kind of simple minded here. It was like, if I'm in line first to build, to get something, I'm in line first.
Yeah.
But you're saying that there's somebody's going to pay better on time kind of thing. They skip the line. How's that working?
Yeah. It's just like a little bit of everything, right? All right. Let's say today I got a quote in from a supplier for a chiller. That quote will have a price expiration date on it. But I'm still in the bidding phase. So, I'm still have 3, 4, 5 weeks or months of bidding, leveling, and awarding before I award that manufacturer, that supplier. And during that time, nothing is sticks, right? So even if a subcontractor, hey, like I'm a general contractor, I award a subcontractor in a mechanical package. All right, that mechanical contractor is still going to engage with their supplier network to see if they can get better pricing on alternate manufacturers. And all that time, all those things, like kind of manipulate that supply chain, right? There's just because I got a price for $1 million, doesn't mean it's $1 million when I get awarded 6 months later. And you're seeing a lot, like the biggest impact right now you're seeing is like tariff uplifts, where OEMs have the ability to increase the cost of the piece of equipment up until it shows up at the job site. Which could be, again, on an 80-week turnaround on a transformer. it could be $1 today, but in 80 weeks, it could be $7. So it's a very, very fuzzy process because it's kind of like who's holding the bag on that cost. An owner has a contract with the GC has a contract with the subcontractor has a contractor with the rep has a contract with the OEM. It's just a lot
Who,
of finger pointing, right?
right. Who ends up holding the bag when the deal is done? Yeah.
And the capital flow in construction is brutal. It's like talk to a supplier that has 120 days of cash outstanding in a market. They're pretty much just acting as a bank for the subcontractor market.
Yes.
They have equipment that's on the job turned over that
And
they
you
haven't
would
been paid
say,
for.
and a subcontractor would say, well, I'm beholden to,
Yep.
the GC.
Yeah.
The GC would say, well, I'm beholden to the client. And the list goes on and on,
Yeah.
right? The whole idea of I get paid when you get paid, kind of thing that transverses across the board. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can see at the end of the line where it's like, hey, we really need to check, right?
Yeah. But we think like it's hard to guesstimate, but there's been some studies that like $860 billion of commercial construction is financed on an annual basis.
Yeah,
And if you think about that, the financed party is usually the highest risk party, just from a capital perspective. Like a subcontractor has 23 days of cash on hand. So they're paying a premium and interest. So you think about like, hey, market rates right now are 6%. Market rates for a sub might be, 1%, 2% a month.
mhm,
And all of a sudden those numbers get very, very large of, $7-20 billion of just financing fees.
right,
And a lot of that can be really streamlined with a verticalized supply chain because these big ticket items that OEMs need to get paid for quicker based on their capacity could theoretically be paid directly by capital providers based on milestones that are reached. So it would cut that a net 120 to why not net 5, 15, 30. There's a lot of really interesting correlations to like what Michael Dell at Dell did early on when he built out Dell computers and keeping his capacities within his stock was within the payment terms of his OEMs. So
right.
he was able to float and have negative cash conversion, which is like a really interesting metric of how that can scale in construction.
Yeah. So, and this is long term. Obviously, you're bringing this to light, and I think modern times are bringing it more into the mainstream. But this has been going on for a long time. This whole process. So, BuildVision is the idea that we're going to utilize technology to get past this pain point that, quite honestly, everybody knows their portion of it.
Yep.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
and I think that's kind of been, it's almost like the data on this or the highlight on this has been a bit siloed. It's kind of like we talked about. You got the OEM or you got the distributor going, hey, I need to get paid on this deal. They're financing somebody or they're financing a subcontractor. The subcontractor on the one end is sitting there going, well, I need to get paid too. I haven't got paid yet. So guess what? You don't get paid. You're my distributor. I'm still holding out on this. They're not making payment. The GC's over there saying the same thing. And so basically you're trying to cut out kind of that middleman level and say, here's the money over here. Let's get the money where it needs to be so that these folks get paid and then the chiller or whatever you're buying gets there and people get paid in a proper time amount.
Yeah, and we don't like using like the word like cutting out middlemen, because there's still so much value that a supplier and a local rep adds. So like, let's say you think of a chiller comes off the line for $1 million and the owner pays 1.7, where 40% of that or 400K is fees, markups, and just like kind of operating the actual, hey, let's get this thing installed. And then there's this 30% of factoring and financing and insurance that's really not valuable to anybody in that supply chain. So we're going after that 30%. So we want to be able to say, how do we accelerate capital flow? How do we reduce insurance premiums on subcontractors? Because subcontractors don't need to have STI policies that cover the equipment cost. And that's where the value is created. And again, like that 30% is actually just straight wasted money. An owner, pays 1.7, well, at 300K, they really didn't have to pay if they had the cash in hand. It could pay the OEM directly.
Yeah.
So that's the value prop that we're really driving for. Where that insight is like, even from a capital provider perspective, you can go to these markets and be like, hey, we know that this piece of equipment is at this stage in the supply chain. Based on the payment schedules that's been negotiated through this master service agreement, we release net one. Based on that, and what value prop is that to the financier, the capital provider, is then they're sure that their capital is flowing directly to a higher credit worthy individual and OEMs. So their risk of capital actually decreases as well. So in addition to that 30%, there's also savings on the financiers or capital providers perspective because it's a lower risk investment.
Yeah. So what part does data, kind of play in this whole thing? You say you spend a lot of time cleaning folks, data up. What part does that play in your in your platform?
Yeah, well, so we need to have a source of truth. We've had this thesis of this atom is a piece of equipment. That piece of equipment has tons of data that's assigned to it. There is what we consider like spec types, which is what are the engineered systems that this piece of equipment has. For a chiller, that could be tonnage. For a generator, that could be kilowatts. For a plumbing system, it could be, fluid flow. All those things kind of live in old school PDFs, catalogs, or like selection softwares. We're able to normalize that into one structured system. So there's those kind of like those three different pillars of really solid data. Like that first is what's coming from the engineer. So what's been designed, what's been calculated. There's hundreds of thousands of calculations that are happening that might be happening in Revit or some of the newer tools that are out there in market for a mechanical, electrical design engineer. The second piece is what the manufacturer can actually produce. Just because the engineer wants a 1,000,000-ton chiller doesn't mean a manufacturer can create a 1,000,000-ton chiller. So there's manufacturing, what we call like technical authority. And the third piece is actually like the commercial terms from that supplier, that rep and subcontractor. Hey, like, is this FOB job site, FOB factory? What are the payment terms associated with that? Here's my startup fees. Here's my everything else. And all that needs to be structured down to give those insight and valuable. So we create this like construction graph of data. So when things get out of whack, we can see that.
So the three pillars for, common construction, old carpenters like myself, basically your spec, your feasibility, and your cost. Okay. Gotcha. All right. Yeah, I'm a hammer and nails kind of guy. You have to understand. I've got to explain that. You got to kind of put it in terms that I can kind of wrap my head around. So I'm totally kind of catching on here with you, and I appreciate that because now when you start talking about like who's your customer? Like you say you have three different levels. What kind of level are we talking about here? These sound like very, very large products, very, very large builders. Will this help a mid-sized builder? Will this help a small contractor? Is this something that, what does that look like? Because I feel like this, the problems that you're talking about, okay, whether you're talking about a train has multiple levels of business, right? They've got very large commercial products, right? And then they've got very small, even residential, train products. I got a train, I think, outside here and outside the house. But again, it's kind of like who can use this product?
Yeah. So from an equipment perspective, it's very much like only the things that are commercial, not residential. So for like the HVAC side, it's like 5 tons and up. On the electrical side, it's pretty much panel boards and up. So down to the generator switch gears. So right now in the platform, our RFQ tool is no cost for any customers. So we have buyers that are doing one project a year that might buy $100,000 of mechanical equipment to buyers that might buy $1 billion of mechanical electrical equipment. Same on the supplier side. We have national rep networks. There's three massive mechanical rep conglomerates. Air controlled concepts, Marathon and Ambient that own a bunch of reps across the country. They're using it across their portfolios as an example. They're receiving RFQs from buyers, and then the smaller mom and pop suppliers, distributors, really are just like staying away from anything that you could like buy at your local Ferguson. That's kind of more what we consider a commodity. But the value prop for them is like there's really no cost for them to use either side of that application. We think of that as like table stakes in the market. And we are really tied to our customer success. So we charge customers that we can show them outsized returns. So if we save them $10 a year, for example, we would charge them $1. If we create a revenue stream that makes them $10 a year, we would charge $1 to do that. And we share in that upside with the customer or that savings with the customer as a
And
business model.
you're realizing that those dollars based upon your analytics, right? Based upon
Shared partnership with
you've
the
cultured the
customer.
deal. You've cultured the deal. You know how much it costs. You can realize how much the savings was.
Yeah, let's say for a good example, it's like, let's say that you wanted to create a chiller and you came out of, and you get, all right, right now we sell 0 chillers. My
Mhm.
goal for 2026 is to sell 7 chillers. We would tie to that, like, hey, we'll help you go sell those 7 chillers by doing X, Y, and Z. That, you make a 30% margin on the chiller. So we would take, 3% of that margin that you'd create in order to do that. 'Cause that's really like value accretive to everybody in that supply chain. And like these table stakes things, like things that like the market should just have is like, hey, I want to be able to send out quotes. I want to be able to respond to quotes. I want to be able to structure my unstructured data. I want to do takeoffs. All those things, we use a lot of like AI tools to do that automatically for our customers. And all those different parties can leverage that information automatically. And then we think we can provide value on top of that, that accelerates those like actual savings in their pocketbook or actual profits in their pocketbook, not necessarily just like, hey, we saved you 10 hours. Because as you know, like saving a super or an estimator 10 hours, they're still going to have things to fill that time with. So it's like this endless loop. It's actually not that valuable. So we'd rather give that estimator the ability to make more money, give that executive team the ability to get bonus structured because they're becoming more profitable, things like that.
I see. I see. Well, so let me ask you this. Um, kind of there's at the end of the day, what kind of pushback do you get from the industry on this? Where I mean, it's a lot of information. I'll be honest. I'm sitting there. I'm listening really, really close. It's a lot of information
Yeah.
when it comes to the intricacies of the procurement process. But it is a big deal, right?
Yeah.
What kind of pushback do you get from folks who are like, yeah, I don't get it, and like, how does this help me again?
Yeah, yeah. There's always the like the innovator's dilemma of where you are in this bell curve. So, we meet customers where they're at. We have some large buyers that are looking to build out this strategic procurement arm. So they're like, hey, help us do this. Help us find people to hire to understand mechanical systems, electrical systems. So we have what we call embedded engineers that are mechanical, electrical PEs that can work with those customers to help do that at scale. And the pushback we get from, maybe smaller market or subcontractor markets that, hey, we have all this internal expertise. We have really strong relationships with our rep market. I don't want to necessarily digitize this workflow. We figure out little pain points that help them do that. So we made the tool so easy that they just drag and drop their documents in the application and they one click set it out to their 10 reps that they work with in every project. And they get valuable data and insights on top of that. So they can see trends, they can see lead time aggregation. So you kind of like just meet the customer where they're at. Overall pushback, it's construction. People are always hesitant to change a little bit. But that's our goal, is to build out processes that make their lives easier, make things work faster for them, and actually show that value. And we'll continue to grind away at that.
Yes, Josh Wiesnant and I had a conversation not too long back. It was kind of about similar things where we start talking about what subcontractors and contractors make their money on. And it's really not necessarily the actual building process itself. It's about the risk that they take. They're making their money on the fact that I know how to do this business. Obviously, there's pitfalls in there, which, you've with Turner, you discovered, right? And with that second level we were talking about, but I would assume that's the biggest thing to get around, and that's the industry's biggest issue, is because we've got, and I'll always say it's broken process, right? We've got these ways that we've always done things, right? And it's worked to this point, but it's given us a lot of heartburn, a lot of headaches, a lot of sleepless nights. There's a lot of pressure on the field to complete things that aren't really possible to complete, even though, right? Because if you don't have the materials, you can't get to work, right? So you end up in it kind of always rolls downhill from there. But they have this reluctancy to change. They have this reluctancy to adopt and to adapt, and we're now entering into what I call the age of AI, where everything is accelerated, and the rules are very, very clear, right? The rules become very, very clear because technology works in a rules-based system, right? You can't just wing it. You have to follow this set, and all of a sudden it starts to find out, hey, we've been making all these mistakes, or "Hey, where's this money going? This money, it's kind of like the 830 billion dollars, whatever, that's kind of held up in finance. Well, why are we doing all that? Why is that all financed out here, and why is it kind of hanging out there in the balance? When things like AI and your computing systems are sitting there recognizing these are crazy ideas. Why are we doing it this way? And then the human factor gets involved. Is like, well, the reason we're
Yeah.
doing it this way is because we're employing 50,000 people, maybe to get their piece of the pie.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of like, if you look at the last like 20 years, even of construction tech advancements, a lot of the legacy tools are still very, very project based, siloed in a project where one instance for the GC might not talk to one instance with a subcontractor on the same project. So if you think about it, hey, I'm building a hospital that's costing $700 million. We're going to get a group of 40 to 50 different companies to come together for 3 years to build this project. And after that project, we're going to leave and start it all over again. And
Hmm.
during that process, you might have 3 different PM softwares. You might have 3 different accounting softwares. You might have 3 different design softwares. And
And
all
nine,
that continuously starts over from
yeah,
scratch after
and
every project.
95%, what is it? 95% of that data never gets used for any sort of historical context, any sort of what lessons did we learn kind of thing.
But it's hard because it's not tracked. Like if you were to say like, hey, we're going to create a construction LLM, the pain points is the actual installation of how the construction project has been built has not been digitized. You might have red lines. I mean, I literally remember still, I would be in charge of going into the document set that stayed with the owner and taking a red pen and marking that up. And that's me going, all right, I walked out to the job. I looked at it, I took a picture. Then I went back to the 2D drawing and tried to circle it and said, oh, it's actually over here, over there. So
Yes.
for us to be able to say, hey, we're going to go like train a model on the construction data, like doesn't make a lot of sense because every project is a unique snowflake. There's some interesting things that could happen in the data center side because you can make it more cookie cutter, but every hospital is different. Every stadium's different. So like
Mhm.
it's more about empowering those individuals on those projects to like guide them down the right path, but not make a decision for them. Because at the end of the day, like that person that does the actual executed work is going to be responsible. And you can't just say, hey, the LLM told me to do this.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. I think, again, some of these tools that are coming into the market, and especially like markup tools.
Hmm.
Like I said, I'm an old field guy. I come
Yeah.
from the hammers and nails. I was born on a stack of eights. Uh,
Yeah.
it's just one of those things where I think the best data that you're going to get is going to come from that kind of, I'll say, ground floor about where. But question in there is a where are you getting that data from? How do you know that's accurate? Verifying that you've got accurate data on specific things, whether it was how long it actually took for the materials to get there, how long it actually took to get them all installed. Was there any changes during that period of time? I think a big thing you just talked about is as builds. I quite honestly, I mean, can you really trust an as built from any time ever? No. You can't.
Yeah.
Do they even exist? Is my question. Do they really exist? No, because it's kind of like to your point, the owner has a set of as builts. You go check that set of as builts and go, well, actually, it's not right there. It's actually over here, right? It seems very, very. That's the part for me where if you're trying to go back with some of that historical data and trying to figure out, hey, where did we go wrong? Well, let's see. There's probably 100,000 different areas where we absolutely went wrong, and it's all siloed information.
Yeah. Yeah. Selfish plug for a company, Onsite IQ does this very well. they actually have like individuals that will walk 100% of your job on a weekly basis with a 3D camera so that you can do these types of as-built peel backs. So you can actually like peel back the wall. I think that's like an interesting like reactive position that you can go out and like, hey, what do we do wrong on this project? But getting into like the proactivity of it is very, very complicated, very hard.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be like, oh, before I hang up this drywall, there's not going to be a robot that like beeps at you saying, don't hang up this drywall. We forgot to do the rough-ins.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I just bought my wife a new car. And it has all the bells and whistles on it.
Yeah.
I don't like it because it tells me everything I'm doing wrong. It's like it's telling me it's got one of those eye things on it where it's sitting there telling me, "Hey, keep your eyes on the road." And
Yeah.
I'm like, "Hey,
Yeah.
I'm looking around. It's not, But yeah, I get it. We don't actually have that. It's probably a good thing we don't have it, I guess, at this point in the construction industry because you would see a lot of broken IoT equipment.
Yeah. And you think about it's construction contracts are set up to all cover CYA. Everything's CYA.
Well, yeah, everybody wants the attaboy. I literally had a conversation yesterday about this exact same thing. The pencil whipping that goes on with the whole. This is what we did on the project. And it always looks great on paper. It always looks good when it first comes in, and then kind of even on your side, it looks great until all of a sudden the actual process starts to happen, and you start to see the chinks in the armor. Right, where he's like, "Hey, that's not how this works, and you told me it was 8 weeks, but no, it's not, it's 12." Right? Um,
Yeah. So I think the position that we've taken on this is like it's very, very hard to like push and drive quicker like installation or materials and labor management. But
yeah,
like on pieces of equipment that are like kind of you can say drop ship to a site where there's a manufacturing facility. Like everyone's talking about like offsite manufacturing around creating all these different conduit. Like in manufacturing, you can push these metrics more effectively. Like for example, if it's
well, it's a
8 weeks
controlled
and it says,
environment.
yeah, and
It's a
that
control
shift is massive. It's a massive value prop.
Right, it's a controlled environment in manufacturing. I always like the correlation between kind of this pre-construction, and it's not pre-construction, but prefabrication and that manufacturing idea. It's like, well, okay, there is value in prefabrication if everything is
Yeah.
right, if all of
Yeah.
the conditions are correct, meaning you have the exact specification, this is the machine you're going to use. The machine comes in that fashion, and what you're going to tie into that machine, whether it be whatever kind of conduit, if it's for plumbing, chillers, or if it's electrical, whatever it is, but you're manufacturing all these things and it's going to line up and it's all going to meet. But
The data centers are great at this. So you'll start seeing a lot of cool, like a lot of big OEMs are now doing prefabbed skids for chill systems, like air systems, water systems, and power.
right.
And for a data center, it really doesn't matter about the aesthetic of what it looks like. It's I need X, give me X output. So I think it's going to lead to charge and accelerate a lot of these pieces because now mechanical subs, electrical subs are having to set up warehouses to actually like facilitate and set these pieces up. So like that capital infusion in that space could actually have really positive downstream effects to the rest of the market. Because if you're a mechanical subcontractor and you did a mechanical skid for a data center and you invested a bunch of money in building out this process and now you're like, oh, can I go relate this back to how to do this in a hospital, a stadium system? There's a lot of positives of that. So if you talk about like the capital infusion in the data center world, what's going to be I would say that's a very positive outcome that we'll see that should make construction more efficient.
Yeah, I think that could be a definitely just a field in itself. You could be tied to a general contractor, could be tied to a subcontractor, those types of things. Oil and gas has been doing that for a
Yeah.
while, right? With a lot of their compressors and all other systems, where they come in and they take the tanks and they'll put in all the gauges and everything on them, and then they deliver them to the field based upon the specs that they were
Yeah.
provided for that, for that seat. Right. So yeah, I think that's very much a space where somebody could get into. Is like all we do is we pre-manufacture or prefab the items needed for this space. All right.
Yeah. I talked to there's a mechanical sub in New York City that does this at scale. So amazing. Like they're creating their own control panels for systems for projects because they own the service contract post construction. And they're like, hey, you know what? The control panel for this chiller does not work with the opposite OEMs
Mhm.
VRFs on the rooftop. So we create our own control panel that has a screen that's 11 by 7 as opposed to 3 by 3, because my service techs are going in and servicing this piece of equipment, and then I can connect it back to my systems. So a lot of cool, there's a lot of really cool leading. That's why we like working with mechanical electrical systems, because it's also leading edge. Like
Right.
Train
And
just released a report yesterday on
and
like GPU dipped cooling, which is like an insane process of actually soaking. You're dipping these GPUs into a liquid to cool them faster and dissipate heat.
right.
Like that's fascinating leading edge things that like are going to have really cool downstream effects.
Yeah, I was watching a YouTube video on that, and I thought that was absolutely fascinating watching him, dunk that thing in the whatever it looks like whatever goo that is there, but I don't know what that's all about.
Yeah.
But again, I think this all drives innovation, especially locality. I always talk about, can't necessarily drop a road crew from Texas into a road crew from, like North Dakota. The conditions are different. The locality is different. You got different resources. You got different environment. You got different weather. Those types of things. I love this idea of your contractors taking a vital role in being a part of that manufacturing process and kind of and taking smaller parts of it and saying, hey, this is going to work better because they're going to know. And it kind of goes back to that whole thing we were talking about every project's a little bit different. Every project's got its own, ultimately the goal is to collaborate in a professional manner so that we give the client, the outcome, needed, right? If the specifications are met, or even exceeded, great. Isn't that awesome? That, what a concept that is. And if we can do it in a local fashion, we can include local people, that are in the area. I mean, that's, more jobs, those kind of things. That always excites me when I
Oh,
hear,
yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah. So when it's like empower these people with technology that's actually valuable to them, as opposed to just like trying to rip out this knowledge sink. Like it could be really compelling if manufacturers can actually see trends in what they're seeing from engineering systems designs. Be like, hey, the one example our head of ops always uses, like, if an engineer is speccing pink paint, but no manufacturers can make pink paint, it never gets to manufacturer as a feedback loop because it's kind of stopped early in the process. But could the manufacturer create pink paint? Possibly. And normalizing all that data just makes it more actionable for everybody.
BuildVision has that data, right? That's where you collect your stuff from. They'll have a point of reference to say what's trending, what's real, what's out there, what's been requested.
And
So
real
yeah,
time lead times, all that kind of stuff is great.
right,
Cost per
yeah.
ton and all that.
Imagine that. What a concept. That's a great idea. So let's talk about a little bit about your future outlook for BuildVision. Where does it go from here, from where it
Yeah.
is? Obviously, it's moving up, and
Yeah.
where does it go?
Yeah. So we just raised our Series A, I guess not just, back in January, with the goal of building capacity in the application. And again, we have these three parties. The party we're focusing on right now is a lot of OEMs, helping them build out different workflows to automate tools for their rep network to make their jobs easier. So, if we look at this in 5 years, we're going to be the central control point for all strategic mechanical equipment from design, procurement to tracking to financing, through that entire supply chain, and really the goal of verticalizing it. We do about $100 million of equipment flowing through the application on a monthly basis now. That's growing probably 10-15% a month. By the end of 26, we should have a couple billion of flowing through the application. But yeah, we're like very, very heads down on making our customers as happy as possible. We have a unique kind of go-to-market motion where we like embed like software engineers with our customers to build out tools for them that actually make sense for them, which makes it a really fun and exciting journey.
Right. Yeah. Well, when the customers get involved, it's a good thing. And it's sometimes a frustrating thing because sometimes they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, let's do this. Let's talk about on the lesson, how do we get in touch with, Build Vision? If you need to get in touch with Build Vision, what's the best way to do that? How do we get started down the road for some of our listeners and people to start hearing and talking to you guys?
Yeah. So you can reach directly out to me. I'm Mike at buildvision.io. We have a whole dedicated team of AEs, engineers that help those different customers onboard the platform. To get someone started, it's as easy as picking up the phone, giving us a call. We'll get you into the application as a buyer or seller at no cost. If you are a larger manufacturer that's looking for more like automated workflows, we set up kind of more of a detailed review with you. But again, like the application grows based on user feedback, so we want to make it as easy as possible for everyone to use it.
Man, it's a fascinating, platform. I really do think so. Again, some of it goes a little bit over my head because, like I said, I'm kind of a more hammer and nails kind of guy. But I love it. I love the ideas of how it's come together. I've always been a big fan of, hey, if we can bring all the correct data into the right spot and really provide a source of truth for folks in the industry, it's going to create, things like collaboration and communication is going to make it that much easier. And so I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time today, Mike. It was great meeting you and,
Yeah,
and
thanks for
talking with
having
you.
me. Yeah,
Yeah.
great meeting you as well.
All right. Well, everybody, that's the ConTech Exec for today. Thanks, Mike Powers and BuildVision. I will put all this stuff in the notes on my YouTube channel. It will also be in the show notes as well on Spotify for you drive time listeners. But Mike, thanks again. We're going to talk to you real soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Robert.
Bye-bye.